This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. While everyone was first arbitrating whether or not Trump's alleged statement about Central American and African countries was racist, now they've moved on to arguing whether or not his denial that he made such a statement is an actual denial.
Yeah, he tweeted out 21 minutes ago, never said anything derogatory about Haitians or other, that Haiti is obviously a very poor and troubled country. Never said take them out, made up by Dems. I have a wonderful relationship with Haitians. Probably should record future meetings. Unfortunately, no trust, exclamation point.
Mm-hmm.
So who do you believe?
So while everybody's playing that game,
well, I mean,
there's other things going on that are perhaps really.
And the Norwegians. And why aren't the Norwegians coming?
Yeah.
Because they don't want to?
Again, from Stephen Van Zandt's performance in Lillehammer, which I assume is reflective of daily life in Norway. Yeah. You know, we don't want that kind of trouble. Yeah. Okay. We don't want that kind of trouble. We export our mob bosses there. Okay. That's what I understand from Lillehammer. And I assume that's, basically a documentary. Sure. It's what's the phrase in the DC press corps? I think it's notionally accurate. It rings true.
If it's notionally accurate.
But there are things that are going on that are also important to a free society, to restraint on government intervention in your life when it comes to things like surveillance. Kind of important constitutional issues. The Pfizer reauthorization moved through the House yesterday. Rand Paul suggesting it may not move through so swimmingly through the Senate because he's got some problems with the reauthorization, and he explained the distinction he would like to see reflected in Section 702 of that reauthorization with respect to the intelligence community being able to surveil American citizens and people in this country.
This program allows us to spy on foreigners in foreign lands with a less than constitutional standard, or really with no constitutional standard. I'm okay with that. What I'm not okay with is that millions of Americans are collected into this data system and that maybe rogue people at the FBI or at Justice Department could look at this database without a judge's warrant. So we want a judge's warrant. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. You can be for the program and for the program with reforms. Right. And the way I understand the president's position is that he wants some of the reforms, that he thinks that we ought to have a warrant to look at this, and that there's a possibility that people with bias in the intelligence community could use that bias to actually abuse the system. This is an enormous power. You have to realize we have the ability to soak up every phone call in Italy in 1 month, and apparently we did. So we have the ability to soak up most of the phone calls and conversations in the whole world. That power is so enormous that it needs to be limited and watched carefully, and I think a judge should be looking at this before you try to look at an American's information.
And to aid in Paul's argument, Cheryl Atkinson tweeted yesterday, a great investigative reporter, first, intel agencies weren't supposed to surveil U.S. citizens, but they did. Then they weren't supposed to store it, but they did. Then they weren't supposed to search it, but they did. Then they weren't supposed to unmask it, but they did. Then they weren't supposed to leak it, ... Yeah, I mean, so you know what she's implying and or actually describing, and it speaks to the implications of Rand Paul's argument and the need for some sober reflection on just how much unrestrained power we allow to reside in the intelligence agencies. By the way, I mean, since Trump, as he tweeted, is potentially one of the targets of the problem that Rand Paul is raising. I mean, concurrent with the authorization, you have Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows on Hannity the other day talking about release the FISA warrant that the FBI got.
Glenn Simpson said Christopher Steele told him the FBI had another source. How did Christopher Steele know that? Did the FBI tell him? And if they did, why is the FBI telling Christopher Steele, the guy who was paid by Fusion, who was paid by the Clinton campaign, why is the FBI telling Christopher Steele they got another source on this whole Russian investigation? I think that is interesting and something we need to get to the bottom of. They talk about planning stories. Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, in their text message exchange, talk about planning stories with the media to further their narrative. And what was their narrative and what was their plan? It was the insurance policy that was designed to make sure that we can't take the risk the American people are going to elect Donald Trump president. So now this all fits together. So that's what I found most interesting today, is those text messages that John Solomon wrote about, along with what Senator Feinstein released, and how it fits this idea that the FBI was actively planning and orchestrating in a systematic way this idea we're going to generate stories that further our narrative and the plan we have.
So that's about the Trump dossier, and then Jordan consummates that with this demand.
Now it's time to declassify this, make this public so the American people can understand once and for all what exactly happened. Remember, Sean, it's today, 1 year anniversary from when BuzzFeed first printed that entire dossier, that disproven, salacious, unverified dossier, as Jim Comey testified and said it was. 1 year ago today that they printed it. A year and a half ago that it looks like they used it to go to the FISA court to get the warrants. Let's make that available for members of Congress to see.
All right, for more on this topic and the others, we're pleased to be joined by David Harsanyi, who nationally syndicated columnist and senior editor at The Federalist, thefederalist.com. David, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
What about Jordan and Mark Meadows calling for the FISA warrant the FBI obtained to be released, or at least to be summarized if you don't want to do the entire declassification, so that people understand the basis on which the FBI got their warrant to surveil Trump and Trump campaign operatives, and this all playing out just as the Congress is taking up FISA reauthorization?
Well, I think it's a great idea. I mean, the only thing to worry about is there something in there that's classified that people shouldn't be seeing yet? And if we summarize it, then the debate just continues because everyone says we haven't seen the whole thing. But I think if people took a step back, just relaying it back to the FISA debate, and took out Trump's name, because just any president, and think about it this way: did the FBI use a dossier that was fictitious for the most part? I mean, all the important parts of it are, at least as far as we know, untrue. And did it use that to spy on another campaign that it was running against, one political party against another? I mean, I think that would be a massive scandal and should be.
Yeah.
And no one wants to talk about it because they hate Trump. So, I mean, I think years ago there were many, many Democrats who had problems with this and talked about the potential of this happening. And now because Trump's around, they just drop it. I think it's just a dangerous way to be running the government.
Well, and did somebody die trying to get this dossier put together? When that testimony was released a few days ago, Glenn Simpson's, they had alleged that somebody lost their life, but they never said a name. And where's the body? What is it?
When I was reading through the testimony and I read that part, I'm like, please follow up.
I know.
What
Who's
happened?
dead?
No one followed up, so we don't know what that's about exactly. We do know that Glenn Simpson said that the FBI had confirmed parts of the dossier, so it was okay to move forward. First of all, why would the FBI tell him that? It's a problem. But secondly, afterwards, they walked that back, and that was the big moment in that testimony, because that means that that the FBI used something that they had corroborated in other ways. But we don't know that that's true at all.
Well, that's it. That's a good point, and it goes back to your previous point. There's the issue for remove the names. There's the issue of one party using the power of the state to surveil the opposition party, and then there's the issue of the FBI using a particular party's opposition research guy to work in collaboration against the guy he's doing opposition research on. Right. Again, employing the power of the state. These are sort of concerning things if you believe in civil liberties.
I think so. And a lot of defenders say of Fusion say, well, a judge gave a warrant for this. But the point is that the FBI brought him information that was maybe untrue. But we don't know that for a fact. I'm not saying that's a fact, but that's what we want to get to, because when law enforcement comes to these judges, they just essentially have to trust their investigations are on the up and up and not politically motivated. So that there's no way for them to to investigate these things. They just look at the evidence given to them. So that's the problem.
Speaking of Democrats dropping things they used to be concerned about, Tom Cotton made the point about border security. It was just a dozen short years ago when Schumer and Obama and other Democrats voted for the double-stacked security fence along the southern border, which hasn't yet materialized, and now they're not so keen on it as they're trying to, those five white guys Pelosi referred to are trying to formulate a bipartisan deal they can present to the president for assent. What you're hearing about the broad strokes of any deal on DACA and border security, given the president's tweets this morning that what was reported yesterday wasn't good enough.
Right. So, I mean, a lot of the media reported when Jeff Flake had said that they'd come to an agreement. I forgot how many senators there were, but they haven't come to an agreement because, as we know from the past, you have to bring together, majority of the Senate and majority of the House. And it just seems to me the president doesn't even like it. And I imagine that there are just many folks on both sides that couldn't, there are a bunch of Democrats who will never live with a wall, even though they used to support it, and there are a bunch of Republicans who are never going to live with any sort of amnesty. They simply won't. So I just don't know how this deal is supposed to come together.
Yeah.
Although you had Steny Hoyer say emphatically in that hour-long televised confab, we believe in border security. We believe in border security, but they just don't want to do anything about it.
Well, looking at the president's tweet, it seems to me that they want to take that money out of something else, military spending. I don't exactly understand, but it just seems like that would be a no-go for a bunch of hawkish conservatives as well. So it seems to me like it's going to be a big lift. We haven't really had any big reform, bipartisan reform, in many, many years, maybe going back to the Bush years. So especially on immigration, this seems like a tough thing to do, even though it seems to me like there is some space to come to a deal. I mean, if they would agree to a wall, I think that the DACA thing could be maybe worked out, and you'd have a deal. But it seems like everyone always wants to lard up bills with their own pet projects and hobby horses, and it undermines the whole thing.
He is David Harsanyi, nationally syndicated columnist, senior editor for TheFederalist.com. David, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. Thanks.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen